King Lear for iHearShakespeare. Probably composed sometime between 1604 and 1605, Shakespeare's play King Lear is often cited as the greatest among his top 4 tragedies, surpassing even Hamlet, yet it is the least popular among them. Scholars contend that the play is of such great depth and breadth that when it is experienced in performance, we are unable to grasp its magnitude, due in part to the cuts in the text that directors often make and to the intensity of its language, and so the play fails in its ability to convey its themes fully. Still, there have been, and there will continue to be, productions worth experiencing that will surely make a reverberating impact on today's theatergoers and theatergoers of the future. The play, set in pre-Christian Britain, follows 2 fathers in their struggle against nature to find meaning and balance in a universe devoid of divine intervention. The 2 men are set on this path after failing to perceive truth from those that they treasure, or should treasure, above all else. The Earl of Gloucester is duped into believing that his illegitimate son, Edmund, is worthier than his natural son, Edgar, and King Lear foolishly believes the ornate untruths that his elder daughters, Regan and Goneril, utter, and not the simple truths of his youngest daughter, Cordelia. The 2 men find themselves cast out into a barren wilderness in a highly philosophical battle with nature. Aided by his fool, King Lear comes to greater understanding and suitable humility upon a barren wasteland, but at great cost. He is almost unable to recover his sanity while he loses his most prized daughter and then his own life. Gloucester, after being blinded, is guided by his son Edgar, who goes by the name Tom, to a cliff where Edgar assists Gloucester with a mock suicide. Ironically, Gloucester does not realize that his guide, Tom, is actually his son, Edgar. But the inciting event is not the rash competition of flattering remarks Lear devises for his daughters, but the pre-planned division of his kingdom explained in Lear's second line, "Meantime we shall express our darker purpose. Give me the map there. Know that we have divided in 3 our kingdom." To an Elizabethan audience, the act of dividing up a kingdom could only lead to disaster. Indeed, the physical body of the ruling king or queen was symbolic of the terrestrial kingdom itself. By play's end, then, we are encouraged to perceive that it is only through human compassion at its deepest level that man begins to learn how to accept and exist within the bounds of truth and nature, within the vastness of our universe. And now, let's begin Act 1, Scene 1 of King Lear for iHearShakespeare. Act 1, Scene 1 shows the Earl of Gloucester introducing his illegitimate son Edmund to Kent, saying, "Though this knave came something saucily to the world before he was sent for, yet was his mother fair, there was good sport at his making, and the whoreson must be acknowledged." Gloucester also concedes that he has a son, by order of law some year elder, who yet is no dearer in my account. Edmund doesn't seem to be bothered by his father's unflattering introduction, and their attention shifts to King Lear, who enters, accompanied by his daughters, Goneril, the eldest, Regan, the middle, and Cordelia, the youngest, and others. King Lear sends Gloucester to attend to the lords of France and Burgundy, while he, Lear, explains that he will now divide up Britain into 3 portions to be governed by the Dukes of Albany and Cornwall, his sons-in-law married to Goneril and Regan respectively. The 3rd portion will go to Cordelia and her husband, which is soon to be determined between the King of France and the Duke of Burgundy. But before he does so, he wants to hear terms of affection from his daughters, so that we our largest bounty may extend where nature doth with merit challenge. Whereas Goneril and Regan offer ornate words of love, Cordelia offers, "Nothing, my lord." Lear replies with a warning, "Nothing will come of nothing, speak again." To which Cordelia replies, "Unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. I love your majesty according to my bond, no more nor less." Ironically, Cordelia's final words in their conversation are, "So young, my lord, and true." Outraged, Lear warns Kent, who tries to intervene, "Come not between the dragon and his wrath," and calls for Cornwall and Albany to have the portion of land meant for Cordelia to be divided between them. Lear further invests Cornwall and Albany jointly, who will rule in his stead, save for 100 knights, which will be reserved for Lear. Kent next attempts to calm Lear and get him to not act hastily, but this only further infuriates Lear, who banishes Kent from the kingdom. Kent leaves, stating, "Thus Kent, O princes, bids you all adieu. He'll shape his old course in a country new." Gloucester next appears with the King of France and the Duke of Burgundy. The King of France is initially baffled why Lear, who knew Cordelia to be Lear's balm of his age, the best and dearest, should now cast her away. Whereas Burgundy rejects Cordelia as a bride without dowry, France takes her as his unprized precious maid. Cordelia bids farewell to her sisters, perceptibly noting, "I know you what you are." The King of France exits with Cordelia as Goneril and Regan discuss their father's mental condition, saying, "He hath ever but slenderly known himself." They decide they must act together and control their father, saying, "We must do something, and in the heat." Scene 2 depicts Edmund in soliloquy, aligning himself with nature and scoffing at how he is considered illegitimate and called bastard and base. He further divulges that he will take Edgar's inheritance with forged letters he holds. Gloucester enters flustered and anxious over what recently occurred with Lear, his daughters, and the royal guests. Edmund guiltily hides the letter he is holding, knowing that Gloucester will insist on seeing it. Just as Edmund expected, Gloucester takes the letter and reads it out loud. The letter, written, or rather forged, from Edgar's perspective, suggests that Edgar and Edmund form an allegiance in order to kill their father and divide his fortune among them. Gloucester becomes outraged, and Edmund pretends to give Edgar the benefit of the doubt, asking Gloucester to be patient and find a time when he can overhear Edmund and Edgar speak of the letter. Gloucester exits in a rage. A few lines later, Edgar enters. Edmund warns Edgar that he should always travel armed, since he, Edgar, has clearly upset his father and there may be trouble. Edgar exits, and Edmund reflects on the ease with which he has laid the foundation of his plot. Scene 3 finds Goneril speaking with her steward, Oswald. Goneril learns that Lear has struck Oswald for chiding his fool. Goneril complains of the ongoing wrongs Lear does her and resolves to put it to an end. Goneril tells Oswald to tell Lear that she is sick if her father calls for her. The horns sound, announcing Lear's return. Goneril continues her orders to Oswald as to how he should treat Lear and his faction, stating that they should treat his knights coldly so that she will have an excuse to punish them. Goneril offers that Lear can go to Regan for all she cares. He will find similar treatment there. Scene 4 begins with the loyal character Kent adopting the name Caius and a new costume in order to covertly join the king's court at Goneril's castle. Lear enters with some of his knights, and he demands dinner quickly. Kent comes forward, and Lear questions him, clearly not knowing his true identity. Kent answers Lear's questions wittily, and Lear agrees to his service, then calls for his fool. Oswald next enters, and Lear asks him the whereabouts of Goneril. Before Oswald can answer, Lear engages in a conversation with one of his knights about the lack of respect and ceremony in the castle. Lear once again calls for his fool, then turns to Oswald and asks, "Who am I, sir?" Oswald replies, "My lady's father," but this only seems to irritate Lear, who strikes Oswald. As Oswald insists that he'll not be struck, Kent joins in and trips Oswald. This pleases Lear very much, who gives Kent money as a reward. The fool finally arrives and offers enigmatic responses and comic ditties regarding Lear's folly in dividing up his kingdom and surrendering his authority. Goneril next enters and complains of Lear's all-licensed fool who gets away with everything. Lear next begins a series of questions that are directed at himself, stating, "Does any here know me? This is not Lear. Does Lear walk thus, speak thus? Where are his eyes?" But it's the fool who answers him, saying, "Lear's shadow." Goneril next complains of how unruly Lear's knights have been behaving and demands that he cut their numbers in half. Infuriated, Lear gets up and announces his departure. Lear beats his head with his fists, saying, "O Lear, 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 beat at this gate, that let thy folly in, and thy dear judgment out." Then later adds, "How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child." Now in tears, Lear exits, prophesying, "Thou shalt find that I'll resume the shape which thou dost think I have cast off forever." Albany appears confused during their argument. Goneril sends Lear's fool to follow after her tearful father, then calls for Oswald. Oswald appears, and Goneril gives him a letter to deliver to Regan, explaining how and why she has been treating him so. Scene 5 finds Lear, the fool, and Kent, still disguised, re-entering the castle. Dismayed that Goneril has dismissed 50 of his knights, Lear sends Kent to deliver a letter to Regan, announcing that he will be arriving soon. The fool begins to taunt and tease Lear. Lear responds with habitual laughter, but then slowly begins to fear for his sanity as a gentleman enters, announcing that their horses are ready. Here concludes Act 1 of King Lear, for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 2, Scene 1 shows an incidental character, Curran, delivering news that there are rumors of civil dissension between the Duke of Albany and Cornwall, that is, between Goneril and Regan, and that the Duke of Cornwall comes tonight. This suits Edmund's plan perfectly. Edmund calls Edgar down and urges him to fly this place, then tells Edgar to draw his sword, for they must seem to be fighting since their father is drawing near. Edgar flees, and Edmund cuts himself on the arm to make the duel look authentic. Gloucester enters and asks repeatedly for Edgar. Edmund says that Edgar has fled after trying to convince him that, together, they should murder Gloucester. Outraged, Gloucester imposes a death sentence on anyone who gives Edgar shelter and promises to send Edgar's picture throughout the land so that he has the best chance of catching Edgar. Gloucester ends his tirade, calling Edmund his loyal and natural boy. Cornwall and Regan next enter, and upon learning how Edgar has supposedly rallied against his father, they join Gloucester and Edmund in allegiance and even take Edmund into their service. Regan next explains that she wishes Gloucester's advice on how they should handle Lear. Scene 2 shows Kent, still in disguise, upbraiding Oswald, who cannot understand why this total stranger should berate him thus. Kent begins beating Oswald and continues until Edmund enters and parts them. Kent challenges both Oswald and Edmund, but stops when Cornwall threatens death to the next person who strikes. Cornwall asks why there is such a quarrel between Kent, who goes by the name Caius, remember, and Oswald. Kent makes numerous agitated responses until Cornwall calls for the stocks, in which he intends to place Kent. Regan demands that Kent will be placed into the stocks, not just until noon as Cornwall initially commands, but all night too. Kent says that he serves the king, and then Gloucester intervenes, asking that Kent not be placed in the stocks, as this is not an appropriate punishment for the messenger of a king. Regan enforces the order and then exits with Oswald and Cornwall. Gloucester tries to reassure Kent and then exits. Kent consoles himself with a letter from Cordelia, who has heard of how Lear has been mistreated. Scene 3 finds Edgar, who has decided to hide his identity and status by smearing his face with grime, knot his hair into a mess, and go by the name Tom, or Tom o' Bedlam. He concludes his soliloquy with, "Poor Turligod, poor Tom, that's something yet. Edgar, I nothing am." Scene 4 takes us back to Kent, still in disguise and still in the stocks. The gentleman, Lear, and the fool enter, and Lear asks why Kent is displayed so shamefully. Kent explains, and Lear can scarcely believe that Cornwall and Regan could do such a thing. Lear takes it upon himself to fetch Regan and exits. The fool taunts Kent for attaching himself to someone with no power. Lear returns with Gloucester and demands a reason from Gloucester why Regan will not see him. Gloucester explains that Regan and Cornwall are aware of Lear's request, but refuse to see him. Lear becomes increasingly angry at Gloucester's responses until Gloucester finally exits to summon Regan and Cornwall. Lear takes the moment to maintain control over himself. Gloucester returns with Cornwall, Regan, and servants, who immediately set Kent free. Lear then begins explaining how poorly he has been treated at the hands of Goneril. Lear then wants to know who placed Kent in the stocks, but before anyone answers him, Oswald and then Goneril enter. Cornwall next admits to placing Kent in the stocks. Regan next suggests that Lear return with Goneril to her castle. Lear refuses and says he'll stay with Regan and keep his 100 knights, since Goneril wants Lear to cut his retinue in half. Regan says that so great a number of people is impossible to host. She further states that if Lear is to come to her castle, then he must bring only 25 knights or not come at all. Lear next turns to Goneril, saying that he'll stay with her and keep 50 knights, since that is better than Regan's request of only 25. Goneril turns on Lear, saying, "What need you 5 and 20, 10 or 5? Regan adds, "What need 1? Lear next launches into a pitiful speech, during which he vacillates between tears and rage. A storm and tempest are heard approaching as Lear, the fool, and the gentleman exit into the bleakness. Regan, Goneril, and Cornwall also exit as Cornwall states, "Shut up your doors, my lord, 'tis a wild night. My Regan counsels well. Come out of the storm." Here concludes Act 2 of King Lear, for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 3, Scene 1 takes us to Kent and the gentleman, who speak of how Lear is amid the elements in a rage, accompanied by his fool. Kent perceives the gentleman as trustworthy, and so admits that there is growing animosity between the Dukes of Cornwall and Albany. Kent asks the gentleman to report Lear's condition to Cordelia, who is with the King of France already in Dover with his army, readying to assist Lear. Kent also gives the gentleman his ring to deliver to Cordelia, so that she will know that the message is true. Scene 2 takes us to the famous scene where Lear rails against the storm, saying, "Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks," and calls for the elements to do their worst, but offers no unkindness to the elements whom he never gave kingdom, but only curses his daughters, Goneril and Regan. Kent appears and implores Lear to escape the wrath of the storm in a nearby hovel. They exit toward the shelter, and the fool offers the bitter prophecy that great confusion shall come to England. Scene 3 depicts Gloucester explaining to Edmund that Cornwall has forbid him, Gloucester, to take in Lear, and has also said that Gloucester may not even speak of him, entreat for him, or in any way sustain him. Gloucester further admits that he has received a letter which reveals plans for Lear's revenge through and with the assistance of the King of France. Gloucester excuses himself, saying, "There is strange things toward, Edmund, pray you be careful." Alone, Edmund explains that he'll tell Cornwall what Gloucester has disclosed and reveal that Gloucester holds a letter that means trouble for Cornwall. Edmund's main motive in this instance is to get his inheritance from Gloucester as soon as possible. Scene 4 finds Kent urging Lear to come inside the hovel to escape the rough storm. Lear says that the tempest he feels in his mind is so strong that he doesn't feel the storm that rages on. Whenever Lear remembers his daughters, Goneril and Regan, he comments that madness lies that way. Lear finally agrees to go inside the hovel, but decides to pray first. Lear makes mention of what the poverty-stricken wretches must endure, and decides to embrace it, that he may be a better person for it. Suddenly, the fool, who had gone into the hovel ahead of the others, comes running out and shouting that there's a spirit in the cave that goes by the name Poor Tom. Edgar enters, babbling on about his condition and how he has suffered. Lear asks if Edgar is this way because of his own daughters. Edgar explains that he used to be a well-dressed gentleman and committed all sorts of sins. Observing Edgar, Lear asks, "Is man no more than this?" And believing that Edgar is all that man should be, tears his own clothes off so that he is now naked, literally and metaphorically. Gloucester next enters and is shocked to find Lear in such lowly company. Gloucester admits that Lear's daughters seek Lear's death. Gloucester agrees that children can be the cause of madness, stating, "I am almost mad myself. I had a son who sought my life." All this as Lear calls Edgar noble philosopher. Scene 5 takes the action back to Edmund, who has informed Cornwall of his father's actions, including the correspondence with the King of France. Cornwall gives Edmund the title of Earl and orders that Gloucester be arrested. Scene 6 shows Gloucester delivering Kent, Edgar, Lear, and the Fool to a room in a farmhouse. Gloucester then exits in the hopes of finding provisions for them. Next, Lear conducts a mock trial of Goneril and Regan. The Fool eagerly accepts his role as judge, but Edgar has trouble playing another judge since he pities Lear so, saying, "My tears begin to take Lear's part so much, they mar my counterfeiting." Kent entreats Lear to lie down and rest a while. Gloucester next enters and tells Kent of a plot that has been laid to kill Lear. As instructed by Gloucester, Kent has the Fool help him bear Lear away on a litter to Dover, where they will find safety. Everyone exits except Edgar, who reflects and concedes that his own misfortunes are not nearly as bad as Lear's. Scene 7 opens with Cornwall giving Goneril the letter that demonstrates Gloucester's allegiance to Lear and knowledge of France's impending attack. Goneril sends the letter with one of her servants and suggests that they pluck out his eyes, while Regan suggests that they hang him instantly. Cornwall sends Edmund away, stating that the revenges we are bound to take upon your traitorous father are not fit for your beholding, and recognizes his now higher status by calling him Lord of Gloucester. Oswald next enters and reports that Lear has been conveyed to Dover, accompanied by devoted followers, where they are sure to find well-armed friends. Goneril, Edmund, and Oswald exit as servants bring in Gloucester. Regan plucks Gloucester by the beard as Cornwall interrogates him. Gloucester admits sending Lear to Dover so that he would be safe from Regan and Goneril. Cornwall gouges out one of Gloucester's eyes and crushes it under his foot as Regan calls for the other eye to be plucked out. Suddenly, a servant protests their actions and draws a sword in Gloucester's defense. The servant manages to cut Cornwall deeply, but is then stabbed in the back by Regan. Cornwall plucks out Gloucester's other eye, shouting, "Out, vile jelly, where is thy luster now?" Gloucester calls for Edmund to comfort him, but Regan explains that Edmund hates Gloucester, revealing, "It was he that made the overture of thy treasons to us, who is too good to pity thee." Gloucester now realizes that he has wrongly misjudged his son, Edgar. Bleeding profusely, Cornwall exits, assisted by Regan, as the other servants attend to Gloucester's eye sockets. Here concludes Act 3 of King Lear, for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 4, Scene 1 shows the old man, who explains that he served both Gloucester and his father, delivering Gloucester to Edgar, who is still disguised as Poor Tom. Lamenting again that he has wronged Edgar, Gloucester cries out, "Might I but live to see thee in my touch, I'll say I had eyes again." The old man directs Gloucester to Poor Tom. Gloucester gives Edgar money in the hopes of making Edgar's lowliness more endurable. Gloucester then asks Edgar to escort him to the cliffs of Dover, where he, Gloucester, intends to commit suicide. Scene 2 takes us to the Duke of Albany's castle as Goneril welcomes Edmund warmly. Oswald enters and reports that Albany, Goneril's husband, is a much changed man. Oswald further relays that Albany smiled when he learned that the French army had landed, conveyed ill sentiments when they told that his wife and Edmund were coming, and called Oswald a sot when told of Gloucester's treachery and Edmund's betrayal of his father. Goneril is disgusted by her husband's cowardly behavior and orders Edmund to work with the Duke of Cornwall to raise an army that will repel the French army. Goneril next explains that she will assume control and Edmund must consent to take orders from a woman, then kisses him on the head. Edmund expresses complete obedience, stating, "Yours in the ranks of death." Albany next enters and curses Goneril, saying, "O Goneril, you are not worth the dust which the rude wind blows in your face." Goneril and Albany engage in a series of curses and vicious slurs until a messenger enters with the news that the Duke of Cornwall has been killed by the servant who tried to defend Gloucester as his eyes were being plucked out. The messenger next delivers the letter from Regan, but doesn't read it immediately. Instead, Goneril considers the possibility of controlling Britain with Edmund, but that Regan may have the same idea since she is now a widow. Alone with the messenger, Albany pledges to revenge Gloucester's torture and humiliation. Scene 3 takes us to Kent and the gentleman. The gentleman explains to Kent that the King of France had to return home and left the Marshal of France, Monsieur Lefort, in command. The gentleman further explains that Kent's letter explaining what happened with Lear drew tears from her eyes, but that Cordelia showed self-control and did not fly into a rage. Kent declares that it is the stars above us that govern our conditions. Kent next relays that Lear is nearby in Dover, but is too ashamed to see Cordelia. The gentleman next explains that Cornwall and Albany's armies are approaching. Kent explains that he will conduct the gentleman to Lear and then, at the right moment, reveal his true identity. Scene 4 takes the action to Cordelia, who appears as the leader of an army of soldiers and accompanied by a doctor. Discovering that her father is nearby, Cordelia sends some of the soldiers toward him. Cordelia asks the doctor if Lear's sanity may be restored. The doctor assures her that there is hope in the herbs that nature offers. A messenger brings word that the British forces are approaching. Cordelia explains that she expects them and holds fast to her determination that she and the French troops are there to restore Lear to power. Scene 5 finds Oswald conveying to Regan that Goneril now rules in place of Albany and will fight against Cordelia's French troops. Regan is curious about the letter Oswald has, which is from Goneril to Edmund. Regan thinks that Edmund has gone to kill his father, Gloucester, because it is self-evident that the people will be moved by Gloucester's blindness to follow Gloucester and his supporters. Oswald next explains that there is some urgency to his errand and he must leave immediately. Regan tries to restrain him, insisting that there are dangers in traveling at this particular time. Regan wants to open the letter, but Oswald doesn't allow it. When he says that he must leave, Regan says that she knows that Goneril does not love Albany, but instead has her eye on Edmund. Regan next gives Oswald a token, which could be an object or letter, and instructs him to deliver it to Edmund. She also tells Oswald to warn Goneril that Edmund is more convenient for her than Goneril. Regan lastly promises Oswald a reward to him who kills Gloucester. Scene 6 takes the action to Edgar, who has escorted his father, Gloucester, to the cliffs of Dover, or so Gloucester believes. Gloucester comments that Edgar's voice is altered and that he speaks in better phrase and matter than before. Edgar describes how high on the cliff they are above the ocean, which Gloucester says he cannot hear. Gloucester asks to be placed on the very edge of the cliff, and then he gives Edgar a jewel in a purse as further reward. Gloucester kneels and offers up a prayer, then falls to the ground in the belief that he will fall hundreds of feet to his death. Edgar notes how pitiful the situation is before coming to his father's aid, which, to Gloucester's mind, is at the bottom of the cliff. Not knowing who Edgar is, Gloucester asks the stranger to go away so that he, Gloucester, can die. Assuming the role of a passerby, Edgar calls Gloucester's life a miracle. Edgar directs Gloucester to look up and see how far he has fallen. Gloucester replies that he has no eyes to see with. Edgar asks about the thing that held Gloucester's company at the top of the cliff. Gloucester replies, "A poor unfortunate beggar," but Edgar explains that it looked more like some devilish fiend who sought Gloucester's destruction. Edgar finally calms Gloucester, saying, "Bear free and patient thoughts." Lear next enters wearing a crown of weeds and flowers and uttering nonsensical phrases. Gloucester recognizes Lear's voice and asks, "The trick of that voice I do well remember, is't not the king?" Lear replies, "Aye, every inch a king." then launches into a tirade about justice, noting that in some way or another, everyone does something that hurts another. Lear ends his pitiful discourse with, "When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools," followed by a promise of revenge, stating, "When I have stolen upon these son-in-laws, then kill, 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 kill." The gentleman next enters and manages to convince Lear to go away with some other attendants to Cordelia. Edgar next asks the gentleman about the coming battle between the English and French forces. The gentleman explains that Queen Cordelia is here on a special mission and remains nearby, but her forces have moved toward the other army. Then the gentleman exits. Edgar begins to take Gloucester away, but is stopped when Oswald enters, ready to kill Gloucester. Edgar stands between them and adopts a roguish dialect as he makes to defend his father. Oswald is appalled that someone of such lowly status would interfere with royalty and warns Edgar to excuse himself or die. They fight, and Oswald is mortally wounded, but before he dies, Oswald tells Edgar to deliver a letter to Edmund, Earl of Gloucester. It is important to make the connection here that Edgar now knows that Edmund has profited greatly from all of the chaos that has recently occurred. Edgar next reads the letter that Oswald gave him and learns Goneril's plan for Edmund to kill Albany, then marry her. Drums are heard from afar, and Edgar leads Gloucester away to safety. Scene 7 takes us to Cordelia, Kent, still in disguise, and the doctor. Cordelia praises Kent for being so faithful to her father, but now wishes that Kent would remove certain garments that cloak his identity. Kent gently asks for her patience, stating that he'll reveal his true identity to Lear at the right moment. Cordelia asks about the condition of her father. The doctor explains that Lear is still asleep. Cordelia requests that she be allowed to speak with her father, and the doctor calls for Lear and some music. Lear is carried in by servants and awakens only to be uncertain of where he is or if he's still alive. After some time, Lear admits that he thinks that the woman before him is Cordelia. Cordelia says, "And so I am." Remorsefully, Lear asks if Cordelia has poison for him, for he will gladly drink it. Cordelia only offers comforting words. Lear asks if he is in France, and Kent replies that he is in your own kingdom. The doctor concludes that Lear's mind has been restored, but that they should not talk of past troubles, and then they all escort Lear inside. Only Kent and the gentleman remain. Kent confirms that Cornwall is slain, and Edmund is the general of Cornwall's army. The gentleman speaks of the rumor that Edgar is with Kent in Germany. Kent dismisses the rumor, stating, "Report is changeable," then adds that battle is imminent. Kent then recognizes that his service to Lear, whether well or ill, is coming to an end. Here concludes Act 4 of King Lear, for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 5, Scene 1 begins with Edmund sending an attendant to confirm that Albany is prepared to fight against Cordelia's armed forces. Regan believes that Oswald has been miscarried, in other words, killed. Regan then begins prodding Edmund about his feelings for Goneril. Edmund only admits to loving Goneril honorably. Knowing that he has the power, Edmund gives Regan false assurance, stating, "Fear me not, she and the Duke her husband." Albany, Goneril, and soldiers enter, and, in an aside, Goneril admits that she'd rather lose the battle than lose Edmund to Regan. Albany speaks and explains that he has amassed an army not to fight against Lear and his supporters, but against foreign invaders. Edmund, Regan, and Goneril concede the specific purpose as laid out by Albany. Albany suggests that he and Edmund meet to discuss strategy, and Regan makes sure that Goneril comes along so that she won't be left alone with Edmund. They all exit except Albany, who remains on stage to be met by the disguised Edgar. Edgar delivers the letter written from Goneril that advises Edmund to kill Albany. Edgar promises to return to Albany if his forces defeat the French army. Edgar exits as Edmund re-enters with the news that Cordelia's army is in view and they should prepare to fight. Albany exits to read the letter. In soliloquy, Edmund admits that he has professed his love to both Goneril and Regan and will decide on one or the other later. Meanwhile, Albany will be made useful by fighting the upcoming battle and then be put to death. Edmund concludes, promising that, unlike what Albany had promised, he will show no mercy to Lear and Cordelia. Scene 2 shows Cordelia leading her father and the French army across the stage. Edgar and Gloucester enter, and Edgar sets his father down and advises him to pray that the right may thrive. Edgar exits, but returns quickly with news that the enemy has captured Lear and Cordelia, and that they, too, must flee. Scene 3 shows Edmund having indeed captured Lear and Cordelia. Edmund sends father and daughter to prison. Lear is only too happy to be with his daughter, and doesn't care whether they are placed in prison or not so long as he has her. Edmund sends a captain after them with written instructions that will ensure the captain's advancement. Not knowing what the letter says, the captain gives his word he will carry out the orders no matter what they are, and then exits. Albany, Goneril, and Regan enter, and Albany demands the prisoners Lear and Cordelia. Edmund retorts that they have been removed so that their presence will not influence the current situation. Albany impresses that Edmund is a subject of the war and not an equal, meaning that Edmund will do as Albany commands. Regan speaks up in Edmund's defense only to be attacked by Goneril. The two sisters engage in a bitter argument over Edmund. Albany steps in and arrests Edmund and Goneril for treason. Albany calls for someone to appear and fight Edmund on his behalf. If none appear, Albany will do his own fighting. Regan cries out that she is ill, and Goneril admits in an aside, "If not, I'll ne'er trust medicine," meaning that Goneril has poisoned Regan. Regan is led away as Albany calls for a herald to read aloud a call for someone to step forward and support Edmund's declaration that Edmund is a traitor. Upon the third trumpet, Edgar steps forward, but whose identity is still unknown due to the armor he wears. Edgar not only declares Edmund a traitor, but enumerates his heinous acts with an accuracy that confounds the witnesses. Edmund accepts Edgar's call to fight with a brief retort, and then they begin combat. Edmund is mortally wounded, and Goneril argues that Edmund is a victim of treachery. Albany produces the letter Goneril had written to Edmund, which demonstrates her guilt. Now desperate, Goneril exits, and Albany orders that she be watched, fearing that she may do something rash. In a sudden change of heart, Edmund admits to his guilt and asks Edgar, "What art thou that hast this fortune on me? If thou art noble, I do forgive thee." Edgar next reveals himself, and they exchange charity. Albany asks Edgar's forgiveness, saying, "Let sorrow split my heart, if ever I did hate thee or thy father." Edgar next explains how he hid himself, assumed a madman's disposition, encountered his father, adding that when he revealed himself to his father's flawed heart, twixt two extremes of passion, joy, and grief, burst smilingly. Edmund confesses to being greatly moved by Edgar's story. Edgar continues his tale, explaining how he had reunited with the grief-stricken Kent, who had lived his life for Lear, but that he, Edgar, had to leave Kent in his despair in order to answer the trumpet's call to single combat. Suddenly, a gentleman enters holding a bloody knife and crying for help. The gentleman explains that Goneril, having admitted to poisoning Regan, killed herself with the knife. Edmund notes the irony of the situation, saying, "I was contracted to them both. All three now marry in an instant." Kent enters, and Albany calls for the sisters' bodies to be brought in. Edmund cries out that he wishes to do some good before his life expires, and explains that someone needs to stop the execution he ordered on Lear and Cordelia. Edgar takes Edmund's sword as proof that Edmund has retracted the order and exits in the hopes of saving their lives. Edmund admits that he planned for Cordelia to hang in prison and spread the story that despair drove her to suicide. Edmund is taken away as Lear enters, holding Cordelia in his arms. Edgar could not save her. Cordelia is dead, Lear nevertheless tries to find life in Cordelia as the others watch on in terror and pity. Desperate, Lear curses everyone, saying, "A plague upon you, murderous traitors all." Lear says that he killed the slave that was hanging her, which is confirmed by a witness. Kent then reveals himself to Lear, but the others decide that it is pointless to make themselves known to him. Kent next offers that Lear's elder 2 daughters are dead, but Lear responds in a way that doesn't seem to understand the weight of the message. A messenger next enters with news that Edmund is dead. "That's but a trifle here," says Albany. Lear next cries out that his own fool is hanged and says directly to Cordelia, "Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more, never, 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 never." Suddenly, Lear directs their attention to her lips, and just as he is certain that she lives, he dies. Albany next recognizes Kent and Edgar as the ones who must restore Britain to order, but Kent replies with, "I have a journey, sir, shortly to go. My master calls me, I must not say no," implying that he too will die soon. Edgar concludes the play saying, "The weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most, we that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long." With these last words, we are left questioning the length of Edgar's life, especially in light of all that he has been through. One last note. When Lear speaks his last line, there is a great deal of debate as to whether Lear is speaking of his fool, the jester, or the fool, his daughter. The word fool could be a term of endearment, and so there are those that say that the line is entirely about Cordelia. On the other hand, Shakespeare is an astute playwright and may have meant to include Lear's fool within this last speech to let the audience know what happened to the fool, since otherwise we don't know what happened to him. Here concludes Act 5 of King Lear, for I Hear Shakespeare.